All right, welcome to Help for a Hurting World. This is our 5th episode of Help for a Hurting World. And tonight we are going to be continuing our conversation about COVID-19 and all of the ways that it's affecting our community and really our world. And it's hurting our world in a number of different ways. And on Help for a Hurting World, we've talked about a few of those already. We've talked about anxiety, we talked about isolation and loneliness. We've also talked and heard from physicians as they have reflected on the state of the virus here locally on the Central Coast. And then we've also talked about anger and the ways in which COVID-19 has promoted anger here among us. And tonight, I'm joined by a number of folks from kind of the financial side of things. And we're going to be talking about COVID-19 and the financial impacts that it's had. And really trying to come at it from a biblical perspective. And as we talk about finances, I want to just tell you a little bit of who we have with us tonight. And so we have Blake Rowan. You can tell us who you are. That's Blake. He is a banker locally. And then we have Jake Rothman. He's a financial advisor here locally as well. And then Chip Neuenschwander. He is he's an administrator at Cal Poly and also has a background in finance and has taught a number of classes and courses on financial matters at our church and also in the community. And so all of these guys attend Grace Central Coast. And guys, thanks for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And so as we get started, I just want to say a few things. You know, the Bible says a lot about money. It says a lot about finances. There are actually over 2,000 verses in the Bible that discuss money. And Jesus spoke more about money than just about any other topic. And he addressed it in a number of sermons and in personal encounters. And so the Bible has a lot to say. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're also going to just be able to ask some questions. You'll be able to ask some questions. I want to invite you to ask those questions by texting this number. It's posted in the comments and also at the top of the live chat. And that number is 805-316-1202. That's 805-316-1202. Text your questions there. Your questions will come in anonymously to that number, and then we'll be able to work through those questions as a panel. And so with that, I want to just get things going by letting Blake just share with us a little bit kind of on COVID-19 and finances from a banker's perspective. So Blake, would you share with us?
Yeah, good evening. Thank you, Ben. As Ben mentioned, I am a community banker here in San Luis Obispo County. I've worked for a couple of different community banks over my career. This was certainly a unique situation. I kind of started in the middle of the recession, but this is a very different situation. So for one, you know, to be rolling through a pretty strong economy, most people had pretty positive outlooks. You know, there's some discussion both ways, but really overall fairly positive to somewhat of a standstill. I'm on the commercial banking side, so really I deal with businesses primarily of all shapes and sizes, and this has really impacted a lot of businesses locally. I think most people are obviously aware of that. If you look at restaurants that are currently closed, or maybe your local retailer, you know, I'm a cyclist, so I can't go by the bike shop and hang out. There's a lot of things that have been impacted, but that maybe goes to other businesses that you're not thinking of. Maybe it's a production business that can't get some of the inventory that they need or things like that. Obviously, there's even in a more white collar sector, if people are sick or the schools are all out, obviously that impacts any school. Obviously the public schools are mostly government funded, but there's several private schools in the area. What does that look like for them? They're paying rent for, you know, people and places are generally your biggest expenses for businesses, especially in this area. So now you're maybe paying rent for a building that you're not using. So this is a very unique crisis. This is unique that we haven't seen. Unprecedented, you hear that word used a lot. I think it really does kind of describe where we're at. So from my perspective, this is a unique challenge currently to keep those businesses hopefully viable, to help them survive through whenever this may end. And then hopefully be able to come out the other side and be able to continue operations. Of course, many people have heard about the current stimulus package that was signed a little over a week ago by the government. That is probably the biggest thing I am dealing with right now is what many have heard of as the Paycheck Protection Program. That is a stimulus bill and an effort to really keep businesses, to allow businesses to keep their staffing on, even though they may have reduced work or their employees may not be working at all. It's an effort, hopefully, to stem unemployment on the back end as well. But again, that is, there's still uncertainty on how long on that process of getting it all through. If you've been reading the news, the larger banks definitely took a lot of flack for the rollout of it. Of course, anything rolled out that quick is just, it's going to be a bit of a struggle. So that's really what I'm dealing with. Been dealing with it all weekend, and I'm really looking forward to hopping back into it tomorrow. But overall, that's really the big picture, is what does it look like currently in the crisis? How do we survive that? And then what do we come out on the other side looking like, and hopefully able to kind of return back to some sort of normalcy in an economic sense. But that's kind of the uncertainty that we're waiting for, and certainly what I feel talking to a lot of business owners here locally. So yeah, that's kind of my sphere.
That's great. Yeah, great. Thanks, Blake, for getting us started. I think that's really helpful just to get your perspective. And so Jake, as a financial planner, how about you just add your perspective to COVID-19 as well?
So obviously this came out of the blue. Nobody expected this or predicted this, and it's one of those things that can't be predicted. Advice that comes to my mind is plan for the worst, hope for the best. And I think planning is very important. It's important to plan ahead and to realize that we don't know what the future holds, and we don't know how things are going to play out. And so we can look over what we might consider a relevant period of history to develop our expectations. And that is not going to be encompassing everything that could happen. And so we need to be a little bit broader in our thinking, practice humility, and plan for things will not always go well, and we need to have contingency plans. That said, I do think it's important also that we trust God and not expect that we can plan for everything, and that if we just take care of our end, that there's nothing that can happen to us. That is definitely not true. And so our plans, we should plan the best we can, trusting God to honor our efforts, and committing our ways to Him, and realizing that it's God who is ultimately going to provide for us and protect us. On the investment side, I think that this really shows the need for diversification and for having a long-term perspective, and for making sure that one's portfolio is aligned with their risk. And again, we don't know what's going to happen. I always get a little bit of a chuckle when I hear people saying, well, what could make the market go down? I don't see experts say, I don't see anything that's going to make the market go down, therefore it's not going to. And I always respond to, it's not the things that you see that you need to worry about. It's the things that you have no idea about and aren't even probably creative enough to think of, that are going to probably ultimately end up being what will cause a reevaluation of value. So we've been spoiled with 10 years of U.S. stocks going up pretty robustly, and so that trend has now been broken. But it should not that 10-year history should not be making us think that that's what we should always expect. And throughout history, there have been shocks to markets. The U.S. has been pretty blessed compared to a lot of places, but even here we've had a lot of events happen over history that have caused things to come crashing down. So I think it's important to have a plan, to stick to the plan. It's always best to plan ahead of time and not be on the fly trying to come up with a plan when emotions are running wild. And then one other thing I wanted to say about what we've seen in the market the last 6 weeks is just the wild fluctuations show that nobody really knows yet what to expect. And this is not normal for for stocks to be moving up and down as fast as they are and as far on a daily basis. And most companies have pulled their forward guidance. So basically their management teams are saying, we don't know what to expect. We can't even make a forecast at this point, which is a pretty difficult environment to try to invest in and try to plan in. And so that's where we are at the moment. And people try to time, well, when's the best time to jump in and take advantage. And it's really hard to say, because we don't know how long the virus is going to last. We don't know how long all of these other measures to try to protect people will last. And so right now there's just a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, that's helpful just to even think about, how unprecedented it is for the large fluctuations to be happening. I think that's really helpful to hear you say that. As someone who's not as well versed in the market personally, that helps me understand a little bit of just how new and unique this current situation is. That's really, really helpful. Thanks, Jake.
Mm-hmm.
So Chip, you are an administrator at Cal Poly. You also teach a number of financial classes. And I know that you have the ability to speak to kind of a lot of the biblical principles of finance. And so can you share some of those with us as we kind of get this discussion started?
Yeah, I appreciate that disclaimer, Ben, and for being here. I'm not a financial planner. I'm not a banker. I'm not one of those. I'm not one of those people. I'm just somebody who, I remember when I was 20 something years old and I thought, I need to figure this thing out. And I just read every book I could get my hands on. I started cold calling people who were wealthy and said, hey, can I interview you for a little bit? And some of the big surprises to me came from scripture that, Ben, you're completely right. God has a lot to say about money. And he knows that it's a pretty big part of our lives. And so you're completely right. There's so much that God has in store for us in numerous ways that he blesses us, just one of which being financial resources. And so as I grew in knowledge, learning about kind of the nuts and bolts, it's been good to remember that, God's always in control. And one of the things I had wrestled with, this is just a little bit of my personal stuff, but I'd wrestled with as a young believer is it okay to talk about money? Is it okay as a Christian to say, what's the best way to kind of build an investment portfolio? Is that okay? And there are warnings in the Bible that talk about, the dangers of making money the ultimate thing. But it's also important to remember that God talks about that there's a place for just what you're to do with wealth. In 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19, it says, as for the rich in this present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, which is so it's so prevalent right now. I mean, people are focused on what's happening on the money channels and like what's happening with the market, not to focus on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They're to do good, to be rich in good works. This is talking about the people who are rich in this present age, rich to do good works, to be generous and ready to share, thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is truly life. And as I was, Lisa and I, my wife, we went to Costco yesterday morning, probably ill-advised, but we went, and the line went, down Costco. We were somewhere in the line behind. We weren't all the way down to Old Navy, but the line definitely did wrap around Old Navy. And I was thinking, as we were going into Costco, we've never really had it at a time before where there was uncertainty if certain things were going to be there. Whereas other cultures in the world, they know what that feels like. And so you think about it in those terms, I mean, this country, in many, even if those who would think of themselves as in the middle class, we're really kind of blessed with a lot of wealth. And so to be in this time of uncertainty, I think this is a very relevant topic to be talking about and diving into these issues. So I'm so excited to be here.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I was recently reading a book by a guy named Timothy Keller, who's a pastor in New York City. And he wrote this book actually right after the downturn in '08 and '09. And it's called Counterfeit Gods. And he talks about power, sex, and money as these three idols, like modern day idols that people, they're good things. All of those are power. It's good to have power. Sex is a good thing. It's created by God. That's what Christians believe. And money is also, it's not bad in and of itself, but when we take any of those good things, we make them God things, things that have God level proportions, then they can suck the life out of us. And he starts off the book with just this litany of references of financiers who have taken their life as a result of all the money that they lost, or their businesses crashing around them, all these things. People just saying, now that this is gone, I have nothing left. And if you're watching tonight and that's kind of where you're at, we want you to know that that's real. And there are suicide hotlines that you can call. There are people there to help you. And we know that in the past, when there's been economic downturn like this, it has led some people to take really dramatic and drastic measures, even taking their own life. And so we don't take this topic lightly. And yet we do, as Christians, we have a deep hope that doesn't allow us to say that's where everyone must go if things really get this bad, that there are other options, and that there is a way to make it through this with hope in our hearts that's not just false and trite and light and fluffy, but is actually deep and profound and real. And so as we get going, one of the questions that I'm asking as someone who's trying to stay up on the conversation, but man, I just feel like the pace of things is so quick. One of the questions that I wanted to start out with was, what are some of the main questions you guys are hearing about finances right now? And what are some of the main questions you're asking right now yourself? And so who wants to get us started?
Well, Ben, I can start us, so we'll get rolling here. So, some of the things I'm hearing, obviously living in the banking world with a lot of business owners, is what does the stimulus package mean to me? What are the relief options available? I think I've talked to some business owners that need that relief today. And there's some business owners that are looking, maybe they own real estate. And they're saying, yeah, I got my rent payments for April, but a lot of my tenants, maybe they got furloughed, maybe they don't have a job right now. So I'm a little worried about May's payments. So now they're starting to look at what are the relief options for my business. There's, I've talked to a couple of doctors that are looking at, hey, well, all of a sudden they're general practitioners or something like that, and they're not even considered essential. So they're doing minimal work. Their offices are shut down, so that means their staff is either furloughed. So what are some of the relief options available to them, even if it's deferral and mortgage payments or that sort of thing? Again, kind of unprecedented times. There was not so much of this in the last recession, but there seems to be a lot available right now on a short-term basis. Most banks are working with their commercial customers. I know within California, especially, the governor has kind of made a deal with several of the larger banks who own a lot of the residential mortgage debt to postpone some payments, hopefully get people through this time period. So even speaking in some of the troubles, if maybe you're at that point, there's potentially some options there, or maybe things to look at if you're like, there could be something on the horizon. So those are some of the questions I'm getting, and just, looking at what's on the table. And maybe you're not in that position. And so I'd even advise some people that maybe are like, hey, everything's good for me. Maybe take some of that pressure off of don't try and take some low hanging fruit, so to speak, if it's something you think you could get, but you don't need, and kind of clog it up for other people that may. And maybe that's some of that humility, or being able to let other people, people that are drastically in need, maybe they were already living month to month and they lost their job. Let them take that phone line maybe to get to their mortgage holder. But those are really the questions. There's a lot out there right now. as far as relief. And again, that runs for a couple months, hopefully to get people situated, and hopefully this over with before that ends. But that's kind of one of the biggest questions I've gotten from both friends on a personal basis as well as customers on a commercial basis. So there's a lot of options out there. Don't think that you're stuck, and you're without a job and you're stuck or that sort of thing. There are options, and there's a lot right now. So I'll kind of leave it at that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I had feel free to submit your questions. You can text them to 805-316-1202. That number is in the live chat there on YouTube. And I have a question along the mortgage line that we can get to in a bit. So someone's already asking that, so that's great. So Jake, how about you? What are some of the questions you're hearing?
I'm mostly getting questions related to what should I do with my investment portfolio? And some people are coming to me and saying, well, the market's down. I need to put everything in as fast as I can before it goes back up, right? And then other people saying, the world's falling apart. I need to take everything out, right? And of course, both sides seem pretty convinced that their option is the only one. And I don't want to give broad-based investment advice to people that without knowing their situation, but I think just a little bit of perspective. The US stock market is down to the lowest level that it's been since 2018, which is just a little over a year ago. And most people at that time were saying it was really expensive and there was no virus that we knew of at that point. So, and in fact, as of August of 2017, it had never been as high as it is now. Does that mean it's cheap? Does it mean it's expensive now? I don't know, but I think those are good perspectives. I have an opinion, but I think what's really important is to make sure that your investment portfolio fits your situation. And so if you are a young 20-something with lots of extra cash flow, then you're going to probably want to be a lot more aggressive than if you're nearing or in retirement. And so now is a good time to make sure that everything's lined up with where it should be. And you may have the ability to take some tax losses or to get out of a position that had been very high, and had a big taxable gain that now you can put into something more appropriate for you without the tax consequences. But all of that's going to be up to people's personal situation. But I would just encourage people to take a longer term historical perspective than the last month or even the last 10 years, where every time the market dipped a little bit, you could make money by buying it. That's not historically how it's worked.
Good. That's good. Chip, anything you want to add to that first question?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions going around. There's a lot of uncertainty because these are very strange days that we're in, for sure. And I think there's this kind of something in the air almost, and it's easy to see why. I mean, folks are concerned about. They're concerned. I mean, there's a couple of situations going on. You have a virus, and it's this invisible agent. So there's that. And then you have the state and shelter in place, which has really caused a lot of businesses to shut down. And I think when people are asking a lot of these questions, there's kind of this underlying thing of, are we going to be okay? And all I can say is I don't know what God has planned for tomorrow or 2 months from now or what this will look like in the near future, but I do know that He has good plans for us. And I do know that we'll get through this. We're going to get through this. I think my heart especially goes out to those who have lost their jobs because of this. There are several within our church, many within our church that, they had plans. It could have looked like promotion or what. It was a good job and now it's gone. Or you may have some folks who are in an industry which it may not be gone now, but they may be seeing it slow down a little bit. And if that's the case for you, you probably already know this, but it's good to have a refresher to say what's essential and what can I push pause on. So what's the difference between a need and a want? If you're without a job and you are just looking for the next thing, some folks don't have an emergency fund. And an emergency fund, by the way, is a fund that you keep somewhere, hopefully separate from your checking account, that is for emergencies. And, Christmas is an emergency. Birthday, that comes along every year. That's not an emergency. But if you are in a place where you just have to take care of the essentials, here are the essentials. It's really 4 things. And you can add on to those, but here's the 4 big ones. Number 1, you want to make sure that you have food. And I'm not talking about going out to eat. I'm talking about, rice and beans make a protein, of how can you put pasta into dishes, this kind of thing. Number 2, you need shelter. Number 3, you need to keep the lights on. You need utilities. Number 4, transportation, which not a lot of us need a whole lot of transportation these days, but we're talking about, gas, getting on the bus, that kind of thing. And then if you're in that place, if you're one of these folks who's saying, hey, I've lost my job, what do I do? One of the things I want to encourage you to do is to do something that is counterintuitive to me, which is to kind of keep it quiet. I tend to be somebody who doesn't want to let people know about things that are vulnerable, but I want to encourage you to talk to people about it, because you never know where an opportunity is going to live. If I don't mean for this to be a shameless plug, but Grace is a wonderful community for letting people know about where your needs are at. So if that speaks to you, if you're at a place of uncertainty, or you're just not sure where the next paycheck is going to come from, I would say reach out to Grace Central Coast. You can just Google us, and I would say, leave a note, let us know.
Yeah, that's great, Chip. Thanks for that. Thanks for just outlining those 4 things. And I've actually had a few questions come in already, so thanks for asking those questions. And so we'll go with the first one that I received as we kind of keep this discussion rolling. So thanks for asking those questions. You can continue to text them to that number in the feed there. The first question is this, and Blake, I kind of gave you a heads up that this one was coming. Our mortgage lender is not allowing loan deferrals at this point, but is offering forbearance periods. I don't even know what that is. Is that something you would recommend if money is tight for us?
It's tough to say without kind of knowing the whole circumstance. Again, I think more will come.
What is a forbearance period? Can you define that?
I'd honestly have to see what the home mortgage lender is actually calling a forbearance period, but realistically, what they're probably saying is you can make that payment late and we're not going to ding you for it. I've seen that quite a bit of more of a, hey, we're not going to show it reportable on your credit report if you're basically a month late, but you're going to have to make. So if you don't make your April payment, you're going to owe me 2 payments in May. Something around those lines is probably what the language is. To some extent, I wouldn't be afraid to take advantage of maybe that first paycheck rolls in and that's not quite enough to make the payment. Maybe that mid-month one, if you have the paychecks. If you're out of work and waiting for maybe some sort of unemployment, it depends. Again, I would not be afraid to call them and work more a lot of the direction that certain banks are getting, or work with people on a case by case. I don't think there's a boilerplate, just from being in the back rooms a little bit. Again, this is so unprecedented. This is no one's fault. A little bit to go off of what Chip said of being vulnerable and opening up. This is no one's fault. I kind of saw a comment, it is a little slightly off of the topic, but of Mindbody with some of the layoffs. Really, Mindbody had, in a lot of ways, had a great strategy. You built a business around thousands and thousands and thousands of small businesses. There's no way that every small business closes. So if salons closed, then you still have gyms and whatever else. Well, guess what? All of those are closed right now. Who would have predicted that? Nobody. So again, just all that to say, none of this was predictable. So I guarantee your mortgage lender is trying to figure out how in the world it's best to handle this. So if you're in that position where you're like, boy, this is probably not going to happen, don't be afraid to reach out to them and open up and be a little vulnerable with them. They're maybe not going to have that grace that a church community is going to have, but they may also say, hey, listen, that makes sense. We can do a little more than what we said. But again, if worse comes to worse, I think you could use that forbearance. I'm seeing a lot of that. We're not going to charge a late fee. We're not going to report it on your credit score. So even, it's not even going to hurt your credit score in the long run. So that's kind of weak way of saying it depends, but if you need to, I would not be afraid to use something like that.
Jake, Chip, anything you want to add to that? Thanks, Blake. I think there's a lot of wisdom in there. I don't feel like you skirted the question, but yeah. Anything to add, guys?
From what I've heard, this is all secondhand, third hand, a lot of vendors are being pretty understanding with businesses. And I imagine they are with individuals as well. So everybody knows what's going on. It's impacting everybody. And I think just if there's an issue with not having money to make bills, contacting whoever you need to make the payment to, and just trying to work something out. And I think people are pretty willing to work with you right now.
Yeah, agreed. And I think this applies across the board too. So if you have lost a job or you're in a place of hardship, reaching out to, and if you do owe money, anybody you do owe money to, and just say, hey, here's the situation. I've been hearing about folks reaching out to different loan entities and saying, here's your situation. What can we do? So yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I think that personal connection, especially since it's no one's fault, it's great to hear that is something that's working out there a little bit and is an active discussion, and that there's an openness. That's really encouraging for me to hear, even that there's a little bit of a kindness and a mercy that's out there and available for people. So that's great. So another question that came in is very simple and straightforward. Is now a good time to start a business? Pretty broad and general, probably depends on a lot of details, but generally speaking, principally, what would you say?
What's the business? Because I mean, if you got a great idea, I mean, maybe it's time to get some investors. But it depends. I think I've heard if your idea is to open a retail business right now, probably not a great idea. But I mean, there's, you're probably not going to get a lot of capital if you're looking for capital. But there's never a bad time to open a business. There's usually opportunities. So that's a very broad question. So I'll leave it at that.
I would say if you are in a secure job right now, probably best to push pause on jumping from your job right now. That would be my 2 cents. And that would also apply to maybe changing jobs, unless it looks like a really spectacular opportunity. This would probably be a time to kind of push pause on some things. It's just a season. You may hit that next stride when at some point. It's just for right now. There is a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, I think a lot of great businesses have been started during times of economic hardship. So there is that. On the other hand, I expect that people's propensity to spend is going to be diminished for the foreseeable future. And so depending on what the business is, if it's a solution that saves people money, it may be a great time for it. But if it's asking people to buy something that they don't necessarily need in addition to whatever they're already doing, it's probably a more difficult than average time right now.
That's good. That's good. All right. Another question that came in. It's on the kind of job market side of things as well. I have a steady job now, but I'm anticipating job changes or the loss of a job in coming months if things continue this way. I don't have enough savings to cover multiple months of job loss and job searching. What advice do you have? It's related to what we just talked about a little bit with some of your advice, but it's unique as well. So what advice do you have?
So the Paycheck Protection Program, I think, is going to help a lot of businesses keep their employees. And so that probably, depending on where this person is working, probably gives them a pretty good chance of being employed until June. And then there could be other fiscal relief packages coming after this if the situation is still going on. And then the federal government has also enhanced unemployment insurance, which typically unemployment insurance does not cover much. I think the average check in the US is around $400 a week. And for some people, it could be lower than that. But the government's going to supplement that with an additional $600 or up to $600. And so, if you can ride your job out till June and then have this unemployment insurance that's enough to make ends meet for a while, then the thing to do would probably be to strategically use this time to cut your expenses to a minimum and save everything you can, and be ready for that. I wouldn't intentionally jump jobs right now, because that could affect unemployment. But unless you have a situation that's going to be a lot safer and you feel much more confident, I'd be careful about changing jobs. But anyway, you probably have time to prepare.
Yeah, that's great. This might be a good moment just to talk real quick about budgeting. And I'm sure a lot of people hear the word in the sense of like, like eating my vegetables. I don't want to budget. Budgeting, once you write something down, it's so empowering in this time where we feel like we have no power. There are so many things that are beyond our control, and to have something in your life where you can start telling your money where you want it to go, and you are in control, and you are telling each dollar, this is going to go here, this is going to go here, this is going to go here. And they have some great products out there now. You can use an Excel spreadsheet. Ben, I don't know if you're open for it, but there's maybe we could put a spreadsheet in the YouTube notes, a link to it. I don't know if we can do that, but yeah, I've got one that I've used in the past. If y'all, Blake or Jake, if you have one, but for this person who's looking forward to like this job may not be here in a little bit. Some people know instinctively what to do. For the rest of us, it takes work. It is some sacrifice. And it's actually, something that's been around for a long time. In Proverbs, it talks about, it's Proverbs 21:20 says that precious treasure and oil are in a wise man's dwelling, but a foolish man devours it. And so, even in biblical principles, it speaks to how am I going to save? Let's be intentional about this. This isn't money for money's sake. This is putting a plan into action.
Yeah, I'll just kind of second Chip's comments on the budgeting. If you're already there on a budget, maybe it's some of the things you might be able to cut out. Start looking at how you could lean that. I mean, we even as our family had kind of looked at that even last year, just because our savings weren't where we wanted it to be, and we wanted, we were devoted to putting a little more towards the church and some other things. So we kind of leaned out our budget and said, all right, well, clearly some of this is discretionary. Maybe we go out to eat a little too much, which clearly isn't a problem right now. But, I think this is a good time. If you have a little bit of time, or maybe the issue is, your expenses are pretty well fixed, but your income level, okay, if I lose this job, maybe I'll be unemployment, or maybe I can find another job, but it's only 2/3 of what I make now. Okay, well, if your revenue is coming down, then you need to be able to cut expenses. So can you do that now? Can you at least know what that's going to look like? Just seconding what Chip said, I think the budgeting thing is huge, and to understand that if you don't understand it. So when that time comes, hopefully you can weather it as best you can.
And I would add one more thing, which is God tests us sometimes and tries our faith, and it's easy to have faith when there's nothing to trust for because we have everything taken care of. And it's a lot harder to have faith, but a lot more valuable and a lot more real when we have genuine concerns that we don't know how they're going to turn out. So this could be a faith building time in your life. I would encourage you, as you look at ways to save money, don't cut from what you're giving to the Lord's work, because as a matter of faith, we all need to be faithfully giving and trusting God that He will take care of us.
Yeah. So that's great. And on the topic of job markets and just kind of job loss and searching for new jobs, what, as you guys look around and are watching the economy and how it's reacting, where do you see job markets for people who have lost their jobs, places where they could look for new employment?
Well, the biggest number of unemployment claims in any week up until 2 weeks ago was about 860,000 in 2008 in the great financial crisis. And 2 weeks ago, there were 3.3 million new unemployment claims filed. Last week, there was 6.6 million new ones, which would be incremental to the 3.3. So that's 10 million people that are newly out of work in the last 2 weeks, which is just completely unprecedented. And I think that number is going to continue to rise for a while. In the Great Depression, unemployment was around 25%. I don't personally anticipate it's going to get that high. We just don't know. But it's definitely something that we should be thinking about. And as far as where to find work, it's hard when there are so many other people also looking for work. So I don't know if I have a lot of insight on that, although I do know that some food delivery places are hiring, some of the supermarkets, Amazon is adding 100,000 jobs or something like that, which in the scope of 10 million isn't a lot. And I don't know if any of them are around here. But I would say probably just be creative and open-minded and realize this is a temporary situation.
Yeah, I think in kind of agreement with what Jake's saying exactly is, I think a lot of the lost jobs off the bat were in the hospitality restaurant business. So yeah, be creative. I mean, maybe what you were doing is not where an open position is. Maybe it's at a grocery store. I mean, obviously they're extremely stressed right now. Again, it's for a season, and I think thinking Ben a little bit towards another Tim Keller book, In Every Good Endeavor, there is value in all work. I think many times we get caught up, certainly in this society and this culture, that if I don't have job X, or I have a master's degree or whatever, I only have a bachelor's, but we get caught up in, hey, I have this or I have that, so I have to have this sort of job. Nope, there's value in all of that. So having a little bit of humility in that. I sometimes do that. Actually, I've done that over in years past, of an exercise of just like, okay, well, what would happen if something like this happened and I end up without a job? Would I be willing to go stock shelves at a grocery store or whatever? It's an interesting exercise in humility just to think about that. And maybe some people are at that point right now. And I would just say, hey, kind of search your heart. I think it is worth it. Those jobs have immense value. Whatever the job may be, it doesn't have to be a highly skilled job or anything like that. So don't see it. If you see a potentially open job that would fill the need to be able to put food on the table and put a roof over your head, don't say, oh, but that's not the level of job I want. So, and it's a good exercise to go through. And if you're like, I'm stable right now, everything's good, think about that. Are you humble enough to take something that maybe you're thinking isn't what I hate to use the word worth, but what you think you can do for a job?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talk about scripture coming in again and again. It's in Philippians 4, where it says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And, I think it just speaks to where our identity is. So as Christians, we can be rest assured that this is just a temporal thing. All this stuff, all of the things that we get so fixed on, it belongs to God. It's not ours. And to realize that if I have to do something, if I've lost my job, or if it's in a state of transition, my next job for a while may not be my dream job. But just like what Blake was saying, if it's something that puts food on the table, that's one way that I bring glory to God. That's one way that we worship. It's not just on Sunday mornings. It's also in how we go to work.
Yeah, that's good. I think there really are probably, and you guys are probably seeing this in just different people coming to you, that a lot of the questions and the difficulties that they're having are also part of what's going on in their heart. And if they feel like, I don't deserve to be in this situation, that's going to affect the way that they respond to the situation. And so, yeah, I think that the Christian response is is unique, and seeing all of this as a gift. None of, the Christians actually believe that all of us deserve punishment from God immediately. And the only reason that we don't have that right now is because God is merciful, and that he's actually thrown all of our sins upon his own son on the cross so that we don't experience judgment and wrath right away. And so God is forbearing. There's a forbearance period for God with all of humanity. He says that he causes the sun to rise on the just and the unjust every single day, and that his mercies are seen every single day as well. And so I think that's good. The call, Blake, as you said, to humility. This is a time for humility, and that's going to be a key thing. That, like, a Christian response to the crisis is the ability to be humble and say, God, what do you have for me? There was a period in my life where I had a food budget of $50 a month, and another period in my life where I was working 5 jobs, and just trying to make ends meet. And those were real times. Yeah, and those were good times for me, to be able to see myself come to lower points of living and say, yeah, I can really do rice and beans, and that can be my lifestyle. Splurging on a bag of potato chips. So yeah, those are real stories. But I think that's all really good advice for someone looking for the job market, trying to keep things open. I've heard through second, third hand, warehouses are rushing. We recently made an online order at Target, and it took them 5 or 6 hours to fulfill it. So I know they're all running around trying to get that done too. So yeah, but I think the heart that's willing to take what comes is a huge piece of that solution. And so one thing that I think would be helpful is if you could just talk about the ways in which the stimulus package is kind of divided up, and how that could help local businesses.
I guess I'll kind of start that one, since I'm probably the one deepest into that. Although I'm sure, I know Jake is well versed, and I'm sure Chip has read up on it as well. But so really, if you're looking at the commercial piece, that's really coming down to the businesses. There's about $350 billion in what they're calling the Paycheck Protection Program. So you'll see this PPP. Really, that program is fairly simple. It's a loan that the government is giving to businesses that any business with less than 500 employees. There's a couple little exceptions in there for certain businesses, but really the goal of this is it's a loan specifically for payroll. The way it's kind of factored is 2.5 times your 1 month average payroll. So if you're looking at that, that's essentially a loan for 2.5 months worth of your payroll. The goal of the program is that businesses would keep their employees on. So if you're a restaurant, are you paying your employees right now? No, because you're probably not open. You're very minimal if you have to-go orders or whatever. The goal of this program is for you to not to continue to pay your employees, and then the incentive for you to use that money for that purpose. For one, that's how the program is written for. But number two, those loans are forgivable by the government. It ends up becoming a grant. And from everything I'm understanding, it's not even taxable income. So it's a full-blown grant from the government. And again, really the end result, so you might be looking at it, and what a lot of business owners have thought, and to some extent there's some validity, is, oh, this is free money. To some extent it is, but really what the long-term picture is it's to keep as few people on unemployment as possible, so they're not going out of the job market and then hopefully looking for more. What also happened in the recession is maybe a business had 10 employees. Boy, things got tight. They got down to 5 or 6 employees, and maybe they never we can operate on 5 or 6 employees. We're not going to rehire the other 4 to 5. So they're trying to stem some of that to keep the job market robust, because the job market was good before this crisis. So really, that's the basics of the program. That's the main program. There's some other things out there, the economic impact disaster loans, which is a straight loan, but it is a little more robust in which you can use the funds for. it's through the Small Business Administration and allows businesses to really repay over the time available to stay in business. So, and you can actually use those two pieces together. But again, the stimulus package, that's the biggest piece you're seeing, that you kind of hear everybody clamoring for. If you're reading articles on, there's X amount of applications, and really it's a first come first serve basis. So when everyone hears 350 billion across the whole country, they're thinking, boy, I got to go get that money quick or it's going to be gone. So we'll kind of see. I mean, that's I think this week will really be a telltale sign of how the program rolls out and goes. But that's really what it is. It's a goal to hopefully keep businesses going, keep their employees paid, and hopefully get out the backside of this where they can open up again in a spot where they're fully staffed and able to hopefully ramp back up to normalcy. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty on the back end, but that's really what the stimulus program is factored on. As Jake kind of alluded to, there may be more in the future, in the very near future, but we'll go from there. But that's what's known now.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Blake, for that overview. Anything to add, Jake, Chip?
I think Blake covered that really well. There's also a different program called the Employee Retention Credit, which I think generally looks less favorable than the Paycheck Protection Program. So I would expect most businesses to go with the Paycheck Protection or Payroll Protection Program. The other one gives a 50% credit for wages and benefits on the first $10,000 per employee, only for businesses that are shut down due to the virus. So there is that as well. And so employers can weigh the two of those, but I would expect most of them would be going to the one that Blake described.
That's good. Yeah, and to keep in mind that it is a loan, right? So the Paycheck Protection Program, is that right, Blake? This is technically a loan, but it could be a
Forgivable loan.
Yes. Yeah, so it's a forgivable loan, and what you're looking at, even anything that may be left over. So if you lay off a certain amount of people, it goes down proportionally. Right. It's a pretty low interest loan. So even a lot of people are still saying, well, if I have to pay it back, I can, if I'm using that money. But yes, it is technically a lot of it. Most people, I think, will go towards 100% forgiveness. But correct, it is on the front end alone, and you have to prove to the SBA that you kept the people. So that's really the caveat of the forgiveness part, is proving that you maintained your full-time employees to the extent that you said you would up front.
Right.
Yeah. And there's also a couple of changes for individuals, or a couple of provisions for individuals. People can take money out of their IRA without paying the 10% penalty if they're not 59 and a half yet. And they can spread the tax on that over 3 years. Also, there's a provision where they can take money out and then put it back in within a time frame. So I don't recommend people raid their retirements as a first option, but that is out there, that if you need to access retirement money, it will be taxable, but you won't pay the 10% penalty on it.
Yeah, that's good to know. That's good to know. Anything else to add to that discussion? Great. Well, each of you guys are involved, not just as attending Grace Central Coast, but you all serve in different ways too, either on our financial team or on our elder team. And so, one of the things what we've been talking about at Grace over the last year or so is really the way in which the Bible doesn't just talk about money, it actually talks about generosity. And I know we were talking earlier about, hey, Chip, you said, if you're in a tough spot, reach out to our church. We put the link in the live chat there for you to be able to reach out with needs and see ways to support. But can you guys just speak to just the role of generosity in a time of crisis like this, as we look to provide and meet the needs of those around us in the church community, but also in the broader community? What are some ways to be generous in this time? What does the Bible call us to?
Yeah, I think that as Christians, we're uniquely poised, and we have been throughout history. This has been often a time, as Pastor Tim pointed out, when a lot of people are running away, Christians are the ones running in, and it's because we're following the example of our Savior. For those there are some people who are set. They have they have 3 to 6 months or more of living expenses saved in an emergency fund. They don't have any debt really to speak of, maybe their house. They're just set really, really well. And if that's you, even if you're noticing your your retirement not worth what it was a few months ago, which by the way, we're all in the same boat. And that if that's the case, and if you're playing a long game, don't let that freak you out. I don't think it's going to be decimated. I don't think it's going to be destroyed. I think it's going to come back. But if you can be generous, be generous. I think it's something that it changes your perspective. So it's hard for somebody to be generous and fearful at the same time. If you're generous, you're thinking about other people, you're caring about other people. It takes the focus off of you, and there's just something in how God hardwired us. If you're somebody who you don't have the means right now, there's other ways to be generous with your gifts. So it could mean reaching out to somebody and calling somebody and seeing how they're doing. It could mean writing a card if you don't feel safe and going out and doing physical service. But then even in this morning's message, we heard about folks who are driving meals, food to people from God's storehouse to their homes. So there's ways that you can be generous in addition to money. I mean, money is definitely going to be the one that speaks very loudly to people, but there's other ways that you can serve too.
That's good.
Yeah, I think Chip hit that very well. I just think one thing to add to that is, we're having this series. People are asking hard questions. Why is this happening? What is going on? They're hurting. Even if you're secure, you're financially secure, you're food secure. You're not. I'm in a younger age bracket. I'm not scared of the virus. Long term affecting my health. People are shaken. I think now is the time, even if the simplest thing is to maybe reach out to that friend who's an unbeliever that maybe is wondering what in the world is going on and how could this be happening. It's a chance to be even generous, emotionally, to reach out to somebody and maybe be able to share why we feel we have ultimate security. We certainly don't have security in other things, as Chip alluded to. I mean, maybe this is the first time you've gone to a store and been like, man, there's no toilet paper. This is crazy. That is something that we rarely, never in my lifetime have I really seen it. Maybe some of the gas shortages in the 70s and 80s, but really, you can be generous even with your thoughts, reaching out to people in your prayers. Financially, if you, again, Jay kind of mentioned it, if you can reprioritize to continue to give to the church, I think that is important because of what the church is doing, both for hurting people, what our pastors continue to do, how they've been able to reorient, how we are looking after the congregation. I think the growth groups do a great job, but a lot of the staff have really reoriented to make sure that those that may be in the more vulnerable areas continue to be served and have the things that they need. So again, if you can financially, please do. If you cannot, as simple as a text or a phone call to a friend or somebody both within the congregation without. Now is the time when people are asking questions. Maybe you could be the one that the Lord uses to bring them closer to Him. So I would just encourage you to use this time, even if you are scared. You can name that fear with your friend. Hey, I am scared too, but I do have an ultimate hope and ultimate security. So I would just add that on to what Chip said.
Yeah, it's great, Blake. It's great. Jake, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's obviously we want to give when we can, we want to help when we can, and that's a good thing. And I think God allows some people to have surplus and some people to have needs so that we can build each other up. And a gift is a blessing to both the recipient and the giver. And I would encourage people, some people have a hard time receiving. I'm kind of that way. And if you're that type where you're happy to help someone, but you don't want to be on the other end having to receive someone's help, do it. Humble yourself and let the church be support for you. Let someone else come alongside you and help you, because we all do need help from time to time. It's just some of us don't like to admit it.
Yeah. But I think that's a great way to kind of close our time, which is, the Christians believe that we're all in great need of help, not just financial help, but actually help in clearing our record of guilt before a God who is good, but is also just and will not let the guilty go unpunished. And so Christians are called to admit their need, to say, hey, there's none good, not even one. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. We've all sinned. We're all deserving of wrath. We all need help. And the one who came to help was Jesus, the one who had all the riches and yet became poor, born in a barn, not in a big castle, but humbly born to a young couple, and yet came poor, lived the perfect life, didn't have a bunch of riches, had all the power, could have gotten them, was offered those riches by the devil in the wilderness, denied it, said, that's not the way that I'm going to get there. That's not the way that I'm going to get to power and glory and fame, which is all the things that Jesus has now. But the way that he was going to get there was by going through the cross, by going to the cross, by dying for us so that we could admit our help. The ground is level at the foot of the cross. We're all there in great need of forgiveness. And yet through the cross and through his resurrection, and which Easter's coming up next week, through his ascension into heaven, God has given him the name above every name. And if you have faith in Jesus, you are rich beyond your wildest imaginations. If you are the meek, Jesus says, you inherit the earth. What kind of ownership is that? That's incredible personal value. Your Schwab account will never say that you own the earth. And yet in Jesus, you do. You do. And that is an incredible thing to have. What is the price of eternal life? What is the price of full and everlasting joy? It's priceless. And yet it's what God offers us. And yet, Jake, as you said, it takes a humble heart to accept that, to admit our need for a savior. And that's what Help for a Hurting World is all about. We're trying to talk about real issues and yet also connect them to a Christian perspective. And Jake and Blake, you guys, Chip, you've been saying, hey, reach out. If you don't have the means, reach out and be a ministry, a means of encouragement to those around you. Maybe you could share the playlist for Help for a Hurting World with someone who you know is struggling with some of the things we've already talked about. And sharing one of these panel discussions with them may be a way that they feel built up and encouraged in this time, because we all need it. I need it. And these times with these guys and with the other panelists that I've had, they've all been an encouragement to my soul. And so I just want to say, Chip and Jake and Blake, thank you so much for spending this hour with us, and for your wisdom, for your obvious care and heart for those who have asked their questions, and also just for the expertise in the fields that you have. So thanks, you guys. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah. And so our next Help for a Hurting World is coming up this Tuesday. We're going to be talking about grief and loss. We recently had our first death as a result of COVID-19 here on the Central Coast. And so it's starting here, and it's happened in grief and loss come in all kinds of different forms and from all sorts of different sources. And so we're going to be discussing that Tuesday night at 8 p.m. You can check it out on this live stream channel as well. And so hope to see you then. And thanks for tuning in to Help for a Hurting World.